Work is like food. Not enough of it leads to dying. Too much of it leads to trouble. In modernity, we do understand that something's wrong about a person if that person defines oneself by the kind of food enjoyed 5 times a day. Yet for some reason, we don't extend the same consideration to those who define themselves by the work they do instead of who they are as a person, and that is kinda terrible. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so this should be shorter than usual. It's a topic that's been nagging me for about a year now, ever since I started studying a bit more seriously the topic of human relationships from the perspective of the people who did not have the chance to have a mentally sane mentor while growing up. Anyway, that's a long side story that I won't get into until I finish my study on that, which will take a while for sure. The topic that I want to bring to your attention is being defined by your work, or more precisely, striving to be defined by your work, or at the very least, not doing anything to prevent that. That still sounds complicated. Let me explain. For instance, there are people for whom history has defined by their work. And you can put here people like Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, Lev Tolstoy, Søren Kierkegaard, or, I don't know, Elvis Presley. What I mean is that people of highly extraordinary ability end up being defined by their work. But even in those cases, them being defined by their work happens after they're dead or very late in their lifetimes. Granted, in the world of arts, especially in post-modernity, there are exceptions. Britney Spears, for instance, is one such exception, as she has been defined by her work from a very young age. But, by and large, the greatest men of history, as well as most ordinary men, were not defined by their work, or at the very least, not to the extent that way too many men are allowing themselves to be in this day and age. Now, to cut to the chase and avoid a very long rambling video, I'm referring specifically to the cohort of people, mostly men, but also a significant minority of women too, between the ages of, let's say, 25 and 40, who quite literally have nothing else than their work. Now, that in and of itself wouldn't be such a terrible thing if that had made them happy. But as I'm sure most people watching this will attest, it doesn't. Sure, there are exceptions, as there are exceptions to everything, but by and large, the folks in this situation are as far as they can possibly be from happy. And that is already having a terrible effect on the mental health of those people, and the longer this situation perpetuates, the harshest the societal effect will be several decades down the road. While many are tempted to think of what is colloquially known as corporate drones, I'm actually thinking at a much wider category. Yes, the corporate drones are part of the cohort that I'm talking about, but it's not just them. A lot of young doctors are in this situation too. A lot of peeps in finance and energy sectors are in this situation as well, not to mention a lot of individuals in government bureaucracies, though my empathy for that cohort is below zero, as I believe most of their jobs should have never been created to begin with, let alone be allowed to continue to exist. So there's that. But the point of this video is less about judging the quality of the job. There are a lot of judgmental type of videos out there already, but more about what you can do if you find yourself in this situation, and perhaps even more important, why you should take steps to change that as soon as possible, preferably starting tomorrow. And I'm dead serious about this. So let's start first with the why. Reason number one, your job will end. No, I don't care what your job is or how important it is or how irreplaceable you think you are. Over the span of 2 decades, your job doesn't matter. It's really that simple. Once you have internalized this undeniable reality, it should become slightly clearer why there is indeed something wrong if all or most of your acquaintances are related to your current job. The most common argument against this is usually to bring some examples of some happily married couple who met each other at the workplace, whatever. In the vast majority of the cases, that just simply does not happen. In the vast majority of the cases, people who form most of their real-life social circle with peers from the job end up being very lonely, isolated, atomized, and with serious mental health issues. Sure, some of them end up like that over a span of 20 years, while others need less than 3 years. But the result is always the same. That's why you should change that. Reason number 2, pay more attention to what you know to what you now wrongly perceive as being the little things in life. This is a piece of advice that I gave to a student of mine about 10 years ago. She thought I was joking or being facetious. It took her about 3 years to figure out that I wasn't joking, and another year to figure out that I was entirely correct. I saw that story replicated at least 50 times since then, and I still do see it replicated today. People who are so stuck in their work that they don't even notice if their significant other has lost weight or gained weight or simply left them sick and tired of competing for attention against a freaking job. Sadly, way too many people no longer work in order to make a living, but live in order to work. And it's by choice. That's what's frightening, because while they know the results are not good, they can't even begin to conceive that other paths, or maybe I should say other trade-offs, are possible. And that's why you should try, because if you don't, terrible things happen. To continue the analogy with the food from the intro, it is accepted wisdom that we should eat in order to live, rather than live in order to eat. The same wisdom should be extended to work too. One will, for sure, be better off if one were to strive to work in order to live rather than live in order to work. So keep in mind that this is not an argument to quit your job in order to pursue your dreams because anyone can be anything and that all that millennial hippie bollocks. No. This is an argument to reevaluate priorities, because oftentimes life just happens and one simply loses sight from the priorities. It happens to everyone at least once, usually several times in a lifetime. Difference is made on how one addresses the issue when it happens. So what are the little things in life? Well, it's things that make you happy, but you keep on postponing them under the excuse that you're too tired or you just don't have the time. Oh, really? You have the time to work 70 hours a week for some soul-sucking job, but don't have 2 hours a week for something that you fundamentally like? Sorry, I ain't buying that. Again, this is for those who are in this situation. I have known personally people who are legit happy to work very long hours for things that I would never do even for twice their income. But more power to them. But I guess the lie that too many youngsters have bought into is the narrative that most people are, or at least can be, like that. And the reality is that most people aren't and can't be like that. And there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Something that I always tell my students is that I don't know, and there is no way I can know, what makes you happy. And anyone telling you otherwise is a fool. So, it's up for you to discover. You just haven't internalized it yet, but if you really don't know, you just have to do now what you should have done in your early teens, which is the best process of gaining knowledge known to mankind: trial and error. Hey, that's how I learned. Drop the mentality that makes you fear failure. Failure is part of any success story. Number 3, your mental health matters. A lot. I simply cannot stress this enough. Most people who allow themselves to be mostly or entirely defined by their work will necessarily run into trouble sooner or later in the mental health department. The worst cases will be those whose entire social circle is related to their job, and I've had the unfortunate pleasure of knowing such people. And it's even worse the further west one looks. That does not bode well for the long run, believe me. Take your mental health seriously. You don't need to thank me, just do it. And in 10 years, you'll be glad to have done so. Reason number 4. Nobody cares about you more than yourself. Also, nobody cares about your accomplishments at work in the grand scheme of things. This is a tough one to swallow for far too many, but the record of history is clear. With very few exceptions, virtually nobody knows or cares about what were the work accomplishments of anyone, really. Think about the previous video that I published, well, actually not the previous, there were a few videos ago, the one with the Mary Cemetery. Those people's lives are remembered by what they did in the community, by how they raised their children and how they treated their friends, not by how they made their living, not by their numbers on delivering a contract. This is true for the living as well. Nobody cares that you were a top seller at your company. No, not even your co-workers. Your boss might care, but only till the end of the month, maybe till the end of the year. In a decade, nobody will even remember who was the top seller for November 2019. Only you will know because you worked extra long hours for that meaningless title, which may or may not have meant a few extra dollars in your paycheck. So every time you do this, in addition to why, ask yourself if it's worth it. And sometimes the answer might indeed be yes. I know I worked long hours when I really needed more money than usual for a project or for a family issue or whatever. But oftentimes, the answer might be no. And that's why you might want to change things a little bit. All right, that's enough with the why. Let's look at a lot closer on the concrete steps on the how side of things. What I'm about to say is not the complete list, and there are of course a lot of particularities to be taken into account, but by and large these should serve as decent primary guidelines at the very least. Obviously more of that in a private consultation. So number 1, sort your finances, especially your expenses. This is something that I explained quite extensively in 2 separate videos. The links are in the low bar. So I'll just mention here that transitioning to an outlook where your job doesn't define you must necessarily be financially sound. That means being honest about your expenses too. I'm still quite amused when I meet people whom I've known before they began being defined by their jobs, how they try to seriously argue that they simply cannot get by unless they make some ungodly amount of money, usually 400% of the country's median income or more. Now again, that in and of itself wouldn't be a problem if they were happy. But they're not. Yet somehow they were happier when they were making 120% of the country's median income. The reality is that not everyone is geared towards wealth and prosperity, which means that for most people, the law of diminishing returns kicks in faster. In other words, a significant amount of people, and in fact I dare to guesstimate it's about 2/3 of the populace, will not be happier if their income would quadruple, and indeed many of them would be less happy. In any event, sorting your finances is something you should do regardless of whether you want to be defined by your job or not. Number 2, learn to say no. That's easier said than done for far too many people, especially now in a culture heavily biased towards extreme extrovert behavior, exacerbated even further in most corporate environments where being anything less than a supreme people pleaser lands you into trouble. Nevertheless, it is imperative to learn to say No. Most of the time, you know instinctively what's in line with your priorities and what isn't. If you're unsure about that, then just ask the most basic questions and the answer will reveal itself. And if the answer is that a certain requirement is not in line with your overall priorities, then don't be afraid to broadcast it. It's good for you and your mental health, and over time, it's good for your peers too. They also need to hear no from time to time as well. I'm thinking here at 100% of the extracurricular activities that far too many workplaces organize these days, such as Christmas and Halloween parties, so-called team building sessions, and other similar crap. You should say no to all of those, unless you're part of the infinitesimal minority of people who legitimately likes all of their coworkers and is also very happy at the job. Very few people have both. It's usually that one is happy at the job but despises some or most of the co-workers, or one likes the co-workers but thinks that the job sucks. Anyway, ideally you should say no to all of these, as well as to all extra favors related to the job that are not easily convertible into shekels or other direct benefits to further your own purposes and priorities, whatever those may be. And the reason you should say no to most of these is because the next item on the how list is number 3, focus on private institutions. And here by private, I mean part of your private life. Such institutions can be your family, your non-job related social circles, be it church, local charity, cricket club, whatever, or your informal institution. And here I have to come back to a point that I've been making for the last 3 years. We all should strive to rebuild the informal institutions and support networks that fit our needs, regardless of the opinion of the chattering class. And this is particularly important for men. A lot more important than for women, quite frankly, especially because men really do suck at this. But you all have to get this. Your drinking pal from work will not come to your house at 3 a.m. because you have a problem. The members of your private institution will. If you don't have a family, then build your tribe or join an existent one. This cannot be stressed enough how important it is. Not having your own support network exposes you to a whole plethora of risks that you simply cannot mitigate by yourself, not even if you're a millionaire. In fact, even millionaires have 1 or 2 people whom they trust. These things simply cannot be bought. These relationships have to be built. Sure, money can help, but without working on them, they still wither away, the relationships I mean. That's why it's important for these relationships to be as far away as possible from your job, because they have to be resilient to all sorts of changes, including the inevitable change of your workplace. Number 4. Drop the prestige bullshit. I'm serious. Some other, harsher commentators called the way workplace relationships are being formed today as way too feminine. Now, there is some truth to that, but feminine, in my opinion, is not a good enough description. It's feminized, all right, but in an early teenage way. Almost as if the standard archetype was a 14-year-old ugly girl from a broken-up family and with many axes to grind and a billion chips on their shoulders. Okay, I'm exaggerating a bit, but it is nonetheless true that way too many of y'all are in workplaces that can reasonably be called toxic work environments. Now, of course, this isn't exactly new. It's not like there was a time in history when workplaces were all honky-dory and awesome, but in the past, there used to be some safeguards, which, although imperfect, were still better than nothing. For instance, in the past, it was considered at the very least impolite, if not absolutely haram, to ask anyone what they do for a living or how much they make, especially if you are not close to that someone. Today, it's not only acceptable, but those asking get really upset when they received my standard answer to such horrendous impropriety. The standard answer being none of your bloody business. Anyway, the point is that today more people than ever allow themselves to be dragged into the prestige spiral where all that matters is how many prestige points you can gather in order to fit in with a bunch of people you don't like but whom you're pressured to not only see as your peers but whose opinions you're supposed to give a flying toss about. And you need to change that. Not by changing them, because you can't, or most of the time you can't, but by changing the way you see yourself in relation to such people. The fact of the matter is that most of the people in front of whom you gather the prestige points won't even be able to remember your name in 5 years, let alone anything of significance about you. So why exactly bother? Learn to stop seeking validation from people whose opinions have no relevance whatsoever for you. No, you don't owe everyone the truth about where you work, how much money you make, or any justification for any of your decisions. And perhaps most important, once you drop the prestige bollocks, you'll find it much easier to connect with regular people, which represent the majority of your society, by the way. Bonus benefit: dropping the prestige nonsense will also make you less susceptible to petty peer pressure. This is true for YouTubers too, by the way. I'm always saddened when I see YouTubers falling prey to bait from ill-intentioned actors solely because they want to please the people. Terrible. Anyway, finally, number 5, learn some humility. This is the hardest one because nobody likes to be told they don't know everything. But you have to. Because no, you really don't know everything. I don't know everything either. That's why I keep the comments open. The trade-off of nasty comments is totally worth it for the things that I learn from the non-nasty ones. More generally, I put the humility point in this list because most recently a lot of workplaces have become political bubbles in their own right, in ways that make them more in line with what Giovanni Gentile would have called entities guiding the moral progress of the community. Yes, that's a fascist worldview, by the way, and you'd be surprised how many bigger companies do acquiesce to some variation of that. As an individual, there are 2 ways to deal with that without losing your mind. One is to attempt to subvert, and for that, see my older videos on subversion, and the other is to become wise enough yourself as to not fall prey to radicalization. The good news is that it doesn't take a huge amount of knowledge and wisdom to be able to outsmart the whole thing. The bad news is that once you figure it out, you won't like it what you'll realize, namely that my joke is not exactly a joke. It's true. People are not stupid. People are fucking stupid. Anyway, the first step towards getting the wisdom necessary is acquiring some humility. Get that, and everything else will slowly fall into place. Because once you realize you don't know everything about everything, you'll also notice the excesses in your peers a lot faster and smell the manipulation a lot easier. So yeah, do all of these and you'll be on the solid path of no longer identifying with your job. So, to sum up, the reason one should avoid identifying with his job or career is because one's mental health is a lot more important than prestige brownie points in a crowd of mindless drones. There is also an additional political reason for why one should shun being defined by his job. The more importance you give to official jobs, the more excuses you inadvertently endorse for the maximal state to regulate your life even further. So yeah, what do you all think? Think I'm exaggerating the issue? Please tell me why. Also, if you have additional advice, please do write it down because surely I didn't get everything since this is a rather short list. But this conversation will have to happen a lot more often and not from a position of hippie motivational speaker claptrap, but from a calmer, reasonable and dare I say, conservative position, which I admit is a lot harder to do, but it's also the right way. One can complain as much as one wants about the shenanigans that many companies pull, because that won't help. What will help is a change in attitude. Get 10% to think otherwise, and the whole thing will shift. After all, many people end up being conformist drones because they simply do not know that other trade-offs are available. You become the embodiment of another trade-off, and soon enough you'll end up leading by example in your community. When I was told a couple of decades ago, I laughed because I thought it can't be that simple. I don't laugh anymore. Well, I do, just not that out loudly. Especially as I've had people who used to make sure to talk crap about me to anyone who'd listen and then end up calling me for advice. Life has a funny way of mitigating these things. Anyway, do tell me in the comments what do you think about this, and let's keep the conversation going. Also, if you know of any book or other reading material, throw that my way too, because this is an issue still under study for me. And with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your consistent and generous support. Please do consider a donation should you derive any value from the work being done here. Don't forget to subscribe, visit our website, and yeah, I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.